Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Obi Wan Kenobi, starring Ewan McGregor, Vivian Lyra Blair, Moses Ingram, Sung Kang, Rupert French, Raya Kilstead, forgive me if I said that wrong, James Earl Jones as the voice of Darth Vader, Indria Varma and O'Shea Jackson Jr., and Hayden Christensen, directed by Deborah Chow. Now, before I get into this, welcome back to Star Wars after a mini review of the Clone Wars movie about a month ago, and after The Rise of Skywalker. Now, why am I doing this? Because it's a mini series. There have been talks about a second season, but I hope not. Because I want to review this as one thing only. So, let's see how this goes. If this is as good as any of the original stuff, I'll say. Or is it okay like the sequels trilogy, or is it as bad as the prequel trilogy? Let's get into it, shall we? We look back during times in Revenge of the Sith, where clones shoot down the younglings as they try to escape, and we move on to Tatooine, where the Empire have a ship that lands in the middle of the city, and we get a Grand Inquisitor, played by Rupert Friend, along with a fifth brother, played by Sung Kang from the Fast and Furious films, and a third sister, played by Moses Ingram, looking for a Jedi Knight in a bar that I thought was Obi Wan Kenobi, returned by Ewan McGregor. But, as it turns out, it's a civilian of town and a patron at the bar, and the third sister is reckless, and these two opening scenes are incredibly stupid. One leading after my least favorite live action Star Wars movie, and the other is the acting in this is terrible, as it's much awful than in the previous movies and TV shows, I'll say. Which I have been catching up on lately, I have to confess. I caught up on Clone Wars, Bad Batch. I have seen The Mandalorian, and I caught up with Rebels. The only one I need to catch up to is Resistance and the Book of Boba Fett. But I have seen The Mandalorian before. Both seasons, I'll say. Obi-Wan works at a place where he puts fresh meat, and as the employees get paid and gets beat up for saying he has a family, which unfortunately has something to do with a greedy boss, as Obi-Wan goes back to his cave. And is any of this making sense for a miniseries? No. Obi-Wan gets a visit from a Jawa and gets his old belt as well as a toy, as he's reluctant about the Jedi existing anymore, as he's a complete changed man and wants to give the toy to Luke, a young Luke Skywalker in this series. At one point, he has dreams and he tries to tell his old master Qui-Gon Jinn from the Phantom Menace, but is unsuccessful. And later on in this episode, he'll tell the Jedi the Empire was hunting for He's Obi-Wan no more, and he delivers the toy to the Lars residence to give to young Luke. And my problem is this first episode goes absolutely nowhere, as he's living under a different name, Ben, which I'm not going to call him that. I refuse. I called him that in A New Hope, but I'm not going to go for it here. And when they say his name is Obi-Wan, I'm unfortunately not fooled at all. We meet a young Leia Organa, played by Vivian Lyra Blair, in the woods with her droid Lola as her mother and father Bail Organa, returned by Jimmy Smits, try to take her to her mother's sister's place to visit family, as all she does is wave at people and disrespecting her cousin, which is all so bad. And I get why we have her in the show for the universe reasons. Obi-Wan is approached by Owen and tells him to stay away from his residence, and as he believes Obi-Wan doesn't care about a young Luke Skywalker. And we move on to the fifth brother and third sister approaching the town, as the third sister threatens Owen, and the fifth brother tells her to stand down as she'll attack him again later in the show. And I'm just not caring for any of these characters, and it leads me to not care for the show at all, which is a real problem from the get-go. And if I wasn't reviewing this for the show, and if it weren't for the fact that I'm a Star Wars fan, I wouldn't have watched the other episodes. But since I am a Star Wars fan and I am reviewing this for the show, I watched every episode twice for this review. Leia gets encountered by the Empire and abducted by them, and at this point, I just don't care. I know she's going to live based on the movies from the past, and that's very problematic with the series to begin with. Bail and his wife telegraphs Obi-Wan, or monitors, or whatever. video records, let's say. Obi-Wan telling them to save Leia, but he declines because he's not the same man he once was, and the other Jedi is killed off screen as Obi-Wan sees it after work one day. He gets a visit from Bail talking him into saving Leia as she tries to escape, and the man that captured Leia for the Empire smashes Lola, the droid, but she'll eventually get fixed up and running again and Obi-Wan reluctantly goes on the trip. And it will lead into the next episodes, and we'll see how the other episodes go, but at this point, so far, I just don't care. Obi-Wan gets to a different planet, do you know? I don't know if I'm saying that right, and looks for a guidance, but finds Haja Estri, who's played by Kumail Nanjiani. I don't know if I said that right. What is he doing here? As his best film is the Big Sick, which is a comedy. So I picture him as a comedic actor, even though he was in the Eternals, which was terrible, like he is in the show. As he's a fraud for using magnets, and I don't get why he's here, as this is an unnecessary character like Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace. But we get his voice from here to there, which is ridiculous to me. Obi-Wan tries to find Leia, but is beaten up by some guards and escapes them, and finds her and gets her out of there. And Leia annoyed me in this episode as she talks too much. But to be fair, she is just a kid, but making her own choices instead of listening to Obi-Wan, as it was the third sister who had the plot of kidnapping her in the first place. And the third sister is another character that annoyed me half to death, as Obi-Wan and Leia become fugitives now thanks to the third sister, because this is her doing to begin with, as this episode is the most annoyed I've ever been with Star Wars. Leia runs away from Obi-Wan as she doesn't know how dangerous the galaxy can be, particularly the stormtroopers, and they jump from building to building and eventually make her float by the Force, I'll say. After she jumps from a long, far fall, as it catches her, and the effects looked kind of cheap at this point, and I don't expect cheap from Star Wars. Haja tells them to go to another exit, as he reluctantly goes to the other exit and holds the third sister from finding them, but she does get info out of him, and she goes after Obi-Wan and Leia as she wants him to take him to Darth Vader, returning voice of James Earl Jones, and returned by Hayden Christensen in the uniform. We'll see Anakin a little later, but as she tells him he's alive, and kills the Grand Inquisitor, which gives them a chance to escape. And this episode ends with Anakin waking up in a tank full of water, which I guess was interesting, but not enough, as the next episode may get more interesting than this one. I don't know. Obi-Wan tries to get Qui-Gon's attention, and also thinks about how Anakin became Darth Vader to begin with, while Anakin puts on the Darth Vader suit while leaving in the same lava planet that killed him in Revenge of the Sith, which I guess was better than in that movie. And thank God he never said Padme like he did in Revenge of the Sith, because that destroyed the character forever when I first saw that movie. Obi-Wan fixes Lola off screen and gives it back to Leia, and they arrive on a deserted planet that's not Tatooine, whereas Tatooine has only sand in the planet. And this planet has cactuses, while Obi-Wan sees someone that looks like a Jedi, but I couldn't tell you who it was because it was so far away. Meanwhile, the fifth brother talks with the third sister as she tells him she spoke with Darth Vader, as she'll lead the army to find Obi-Wan, and the fifth brother is not happy about that, which is so stupid. Obi-Wan and Leia hitch for a ride as they disguise their names, and no wonder, because Obi-Wan figures out the driver is with the Empire before they get on, and he picks up some stormtroopers that we're looking for Obi-Wan. And the suspense was killing me, as she calls the girl Leia instead of Lola, as he gets confused and misses their disguised mother, which was super close. Whew. And Obi-Wan was making me nervous, so good on them for making me feel a little suspense, as I was nervous, so kudos for that point, so I'll give it a point for that. as this isn't as bad as the prequels or the Clone Wars movies as a prequel. And in my opinion, maybe the best prequel from Star Wars that's not animated nor has a season 2 on it. They get ambushed by stormtroopers and kill some of them, as well as the driver named Frank, so I'm giving these scenes points for the little suspense it has. Obi-Wan and Leia get picked up by Tala after she shoots some stormtroopers down and puts them in a perfect hiding spot so they can escape later in the episode at night. And the actress I have seen, unfortunately, in a terrible film, Exodus, with Christian Bale as Moses. And I guess she was on Game of Thrones, but this is the same acting I've seen compared on this to Exodus. Stormtroopers enter the hideout to find Obi-Wan and Leia while they hide with Tala on the other side, and they tried to leave at nightfall, which happens to at the same time as the Empire beats up on civilians. And Obi-Wan senses Darth Vader's presence as Vader feels Obi-Wan's, and he goes to Obi-Wan while Obi-Wan runs off, and they counter each other as Obi-Wan runs away while Darth Vader tries to attack Obi-Wan, and he just keeps running cowardly, which kind of bugged me as the third sister goes to the hideout and she finds out there's a tunnel, and Leia is running in there, and Tala, while Obi-Wan and Darth Vader have a brief fight that isn't as bad as, but will get better much later on as Darth Vader tries to make Obi-Wan burn like he did with Anakin in Revenge of the Sith, but doesn't completely burn him. But Tala fires at a spot where Darth Vader can't see Obi-Wan as he escapes with Tala while the third sister captures Leia and takes her on the Empire ship. And this is probably the second best episode for little suspense it had, but I gave it enough points as it is. Obi-Wan wakes up from being knocked out as he's on a planet of G.B.M.H while hailing him, with Tala being with him as he meets Roken, played by Ice Cube's son O'Shea Jackson Jr. from Straight Outta Compton, who reluctantly helps Obi-Wan out as Tala gets him in the Empire to save Leia's life, as she has officer's clearance at the Empire. Meanwhile, Leia is being interrogated by the third sister, and the show is kind of growing on me. Tala, I don't know what her name is anymore, gets on the Empire ship and gets in the wrong section in order to get Obi-Wan in the interrogation room to save Leia's life as he enters from underwater. And while he's sneaking around, there is very little suspense, but I was sort of on the edge of my seat as he tries to sneak around to find the 10-year-old girl. Obi-Wan does eventually find Leia while Tala causes a distraction from the third sister, and he kills a couple of stormtroopers and gets her out of the Empire's hands, while Tala helps get Leia out, and Obi-Wan holds the glass full of water until it eventually breaks, and the third sister surrounds them until Roken comes in and shoots the place up with a ship, and two rebel ships come in, and one gets out while the other ship gets shot down, with the other while the third sister, puts a tracker on one of the rebel spaceships as they get out alive, and she tells Darth Vader wherever the tracker goes, he goes, and this is working fine as best as so far. I'm kind of entertained. We get a flashback of Obi-Wan training Anakin before Attack of the Clones ever started, and we pick up with Darth Vader getting news from the third sister that they're going to G.B.M.H, and he promotes her to Grand Inquisitor, which works for Darth Vader, while Obi-Wan, Tala, Leia, and Roken get back to G.B.M.H and see Haja is there while the Empire approaches G.B.M.H, thanks to the tracker the third sister put in Lola, as it tells the Empire they're there and block out the energy, which I found convenient and hilarious. Obi-Wan tries to get the people of G.B.M.H out of there, while the stormtroopers arrive at their hideout and tries to burst in as Leia goes in the vents to get the power back together, which also made me laugh to death, as this is a corny episode, which makes it the third best episode in the miniseries. Obi-Wan and the third sister communicate through the door, as she was a youngling when Order 66 was executed in Revenge of the Sith, and she explains how she lost her family and hunts for Darth Vader, and she bursts through the door, and they start attacking, and this fight goes on a little too long, to the point it was endless, in my opinion. while Tala gets killed, which reminded me of the death of Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace, but this was more believable than Qui-Gon's death, which was a little laughable in The Phantom Menace, so I'll give the show a point for taking death more seriously. Obi-Wan surrenders himself to the Empire to bring the fight to the third sister, as he suggests they end Darth Vader together, and I'm not fooled that she'll still be evil by the end of the episode, as she lets him go, and I thought, what the hell was that? Because it made no sense. Obi-Wan does escape while Leia finds Lola going rogue, and Darth Vader is not pleased with the third sister's actions for that moment while trying to bring their escape ship down. And they had another one to escape in as the third sister tries to kill Darth Vader, but have a fight that felt pretty pointless, I'll say, as he pokes through her stomach, which was again pointless. The civilians lose their hyperdrive, and the third sister realizes she has to go to Tatooine to kill the young Luke Skywalker, which will lead to the best episode, in my opinion. Back on Tatooine, the third sister looks for Owen, who happens to be Luke's legal guardian, while Darth Vader shoots at the escape pod, and while the energy is down, Obi-Wan has no choice but to leave Leia and go on a separate ship back to Tatooine, or first another planet and then Tatooine, and leaves Haja in charge of getting Leia back to Alderaan, and to keep her safe while Owen, Beru, and Luke prepare for the third sister's arrival, and won't go down without a fight, which will lead to a fight sequence, which is the best sequence in the entire show, and it's not saying much. Obi-Wan goes in the escape pod to let Darth Vader fire on only at him, and follows him to not Tatooine, but another planet, and oddly enough has Lola with him to keep safe, while Owen and Beru tell Luke to run away when they can't hold the third sister, and as the third sister arrives, Owen and Beru's farm, as the third sister arrives and starts to look for Owen, Beru, and Luke, and Owen and Beru start firing at the third sister, and Luke starts running away from the third sister as she goes after him while hiding in the rocks. And also Obi-Wan arrives to a different planet as Darth Vader has and he have the best fight, which I feel is much better fight than in Revenge of the Sith. There were more stakes while Darth Vader at first buries Obi-Wan with rocks, but he comes back to life and throws the rocks at Darth Vader, and we briefly see Anakin's face as he says in his own voice as well as Darth Vader's voice that Anakin Skywalker is dead, and says he also didn't kill Anakin, Darth Vader did, and they go their separate ways as Obi-Wan wins the battle, as it'll continue to end when A New Hope comes in their future. And I enjoy the action scenes, as this is, in my opinion, the best episode to end with. Back to the third sister, as she almost kills Luke and imagines herself as a youngling and lets the boy live, while Obi-Wan arrives on Tatooine and finds Owen and Beru without Luke, as the third sister brings him back alive. For what reason? Because she decided to not go bad after seeing her past. And also she couldn't do it, and based on that scene, it makes sense. Darth Vader messages Darth Sidious, who's returned briefly by Ian McDiarmid, about how he only serves Sidious, and we get his main theme briefly in that scene, which was a pleasant surprise. Leia is back on Alderaan, and Bail and Mama Organa get a surprise visit from Obi-Wan and brings her back to Lola. All fixed up and back to on Tatooine, Owen finally accepts Obi-Wan as Luke's other guardian, as he gives him the toy Owen gave back to him early in the show, and stays on Tatooine until A New Hope comes, and we get a brief cameo from Qui-Gon, which is an interesting choice, as this is, in my opinion, the best episode of any of them, as it has stakes, action, and a better ending than Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this show a 4.9 out of 10. The acting is pretty bad, but not as worse as the prequels and the Clone Wars movie, which was made for a pilot for a TV show that is much better than that movie, as I don't care that much for these characters, which is a real problem from the get-go, and some of the characters did annoy me half to death. The show grew on me by episode 3 as it's a better prequel than any of the other prequels, with an exception of Rogue One and Solo, and there is a very little suspense, but there were times I was sort of on the edge of my seat. The action between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader were the best scenes in the show, even better than anything in Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion, as it's still second worst out of the movies. The number one goes to the Clone Wars, and I'm talking about Revenge of the Sith, by the way. And this does an okay job at showing little suspense, but a poor job at making me care, because at the end of the day, I unfortunately didn't care for the show, as it is a mild non-recommendation, unless if you're a Star Wars fan like myself. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me back with Star Wars, and until then, the Force will be with you, always.